I never thought I'd be the guy sharing a story like this, but here I am. You think your life is normal, maybe even happy, and then one day, everything flips upside down. I'm 42 and live in Louisville, Kentucky. My wife, Jenna, is 36, and we've been married for 5 years. It's my second marriage. My first wife, Diana, passed away from cancer 7 years ago. Losing her was the hardest thing I've ever been through, especially since we had a son, Kyle, who was just 13 at the time. I had to learn how to be both a dad and a mom while dealing with my own grief. Jenna came into my life a couple of years later, and at first it felt like a miracle. She was beautiful, confident, and full of energy. Long dark hair, striking green eyes, a figure that turned heads. Jenna had this magnetic personality that made everyone want to be around her. She was the opposite of me in every way. I'm just a simple guy who works construction and likes his weekends with a beer and a game on TV. But Jenna? She loved attention. She was always dressed to the nines, even for the smallest errands. And she had this laugh that could fill a room. When we started dating, she made an effort to connect with Kyle, who was 16 at the time. He's always been a quiet kid, more interested in computers and books than people. Jenna would joke that he was like a young Sheldon Cooper, minus the genius IQ. But she was patient with him. She'd bring him snacks when he was studying or sit down and watch whatever sci-fi movie he was into that week. I remember thinking, wow, she's really trying. As a single dad, that meant the world to me. We got married after 2 years of dating, and at first everything was great. Jenna moved into the house I'd shared with Diana, and we worked together to make it feel like our home. Kyle didn't say much about it, but he seemed fine. He was busy with high school, and Jenna kept busy with her part-time job at a boutique downtown. She also loved yoga and would spend hours at the gym or meeting friends for coffee. She said she liked having me time, and I didn't question it. Kyle stayed home for college to save money, which Jenna supported completely. He's still so young, she said. It's good for him to be close to family. I thought it was thoughtful of her to care so much about his well-being. She even went out of her way to cook his favorite meals or pick up snacks she knew he liked. But looking back, there were moments that should have made me pause. Little things, like how Jenna would dress up, even if she wasn't going anywhere, or how Kyle, who had never cared about his appearance, suddenly started wearing cologne and paying more attention to his clothes. I brushed it off as a phase. Sometimes I'd come home and find them sitting at the kitchen table, talking and laughing about some show or meme. They'd stop when I walked in, but I figured it was just because I wasn't part of the conversation. Other times, Jenna would mention how smart Kyle was or how he had so much potential. At the time, it felt harmless. Why wouldn't she praise him? He was her stepson, and they were supposed to get along. I trusted both of them completely. Jenna was my wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and Kyle was my son, the kid I'd raised since birth. The idea that they could betray me like they did never even crossed my mind. For the first few years of our marriage, everything seemed fine. I worked long hours managing a construction crew, and Jenna handled the house. Kyle kept to himself most of the time, either studying or gaming in his room. We weren't the kind of family that did weekly game nights or big trips, but I thought we had a good thing going. Then, slowly, things started to change. I didn't notice it at first because it was so gradual. Jenna became more irritable, snapping at me over small things like forgetting to take out the trash or leaving my boots by the door. Kyle, on the other hand, seemed more confident around her, laughing at her jokes or teasing her in a way that felt a little too familiar. I chalked it up to him growing up and getting more comfortable with her as his stepmom. But there were moments, here and there, that made me uncomfortable, like how Jenna would touch his arm when she laughed, or how they'd share inside jokes that I wasn't part of. It was subtle, nothing I could put my finger on, but enough to plant a tiny seed of doubt in the back of my mind. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, I'd always trusted Jenna. She was good at lying, though. I just didn't know it yet. It wasn't one big moment that made me start to suspect something was wrong. It was a lot of small things adding up over time. I don't know if it was instinct or just my gut telling me something was off, but I started noticing little changes in both Jenna and Kyle that I couldn't ignore anymore. It started with Jenna's behavior. She was always a bit of a character, always had this energy about her, but lately she was more moody, more distant. She'd snap at me over the smallest things, like how I'd leave my boots by the door or forget to put my dirty laundry in the basket. In the past, she might have rolled her eyes and joked about it, but now it was like she was constantly irritated. And when I asked her what was going on, she'd look at me like I was crazy. "Nothing's wrong. You're just being paranoid," she'd say, brushing me off like I didn't matter. The strange thing was that whenever I tried to press her, she'd get defensive. "You wouldn't understand, okay? You're just not as in tune with me like I need you to be." The way she'd say it, with that little bit of disgust in her voice, made my stomach turn. She was never like that before. Then there was Kyle. Now, Kyle wasn't exactly the most social kid. He'd always been more of a quiet nerd, book smart, awkward, and just not interested in anything outside his computer games and coding. He didn't really have friends over, and he didn't go out much. But in the past few months, he started spending more time with Jenna, in a way that made me uncomfortable. At first, it was nothing but harmless little moments, laughing together about a show on TV, sharing a snack, or talking about random things. But soon, those little moments became more frequent, and I started seeing things that didn't make sense. I'd walk into the kitchen, and there they'd be, sitting way too close together at the table, whispering about some inside joke or laughing at something on her phone. The moment they'd notice me standing there, everything would go quiet. Jenna would pretend she didn't notice, but Kyle's face would flush, and he'd awkwardly mumble something before running off to his room. The first time it happened, I thought it was just a weird coincidence. But over time, it happened more and more. Jenna's laugh seemed to get louder when Kyle was around, like she was trying to get his attention, and Kyle seemed oddly eager to be near her. It was like they had their own little world, one that didn't include me. I didn't want to believe it. I loved Jenna, and I didn't want to even entertain the idea that she could be betraying me, let alone with my own son. So I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just typical family stuff, maybe even the beginning of them getting closer as stepmom and stepson. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Something about their behavior didn't sit right. Then there was the way Kyle started acting when I asked him simple questions. Normally, he'd be straightforward, but lately, he'd get nervous and avoid eye contact. I'd ask him what he was up to, and he'd give me one-word answers, his voice shaky. And when I'd ask him about Jenna, he'd always defend her, like he was trying to protect her from something. "She's been really stressed out lately," he'd say. "She's just been dealing with a lot." But it didn't add up. She had no more stress than usual. And when he said those things, I could tell it wasn't because he cared for her as a stepmom. It was like he was covering for her. One evening, Jenna went out for drinks with a friend she hadn't mentioned before. She was all dolled up, wearing this tight red dress that was way more dressy than she'd wear for a casual night out. I tried to play it cool, even though my gut was telling me this wasn't just a normal night out. She saw my raised eyebrow and shrugged it off. "Lisa's been going through some stuff. I'm just trying to cheer her up." She kissed me goodbye, but there was a weird edge to her voice, like she was hiding something. When Jenna left, Kyle was still downstairs, acting like he was watching TV, but he wasn't really paying attention to it. He was dressed in a nice shirt and cologne, something he never did unless he was going out. I didn't ask him where he was going. I figured it was none of my business, but everything about that night felt off. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I started to notice how both of them acted when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The way they'd look at each other, just a little too long, like there was some secret between them that they couldn't hide. And then there were the small things, like how Kyle would sit just a little too close to Jenna, or how he'd laugh a little too loud at her jokes. It was subtle, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, after Jenna left and Kyle went to his room, I sat in the living room, stewing in my own thoughts. I couldn't get the image of them together out of my head. Jenna, dressed up like she was on a date, and Kyle, acting like he had something to hide. The more I thought about it, the more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. But I didn't have any proof, just a nagging feeling that wouldn't go away. And that feeling, that gut instinct, started to grow stronger. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was going on, and I was going to find out what. I couldn't pretend anymore. Not with what I had seen, not with how everything was stacking up. My gut had been screaming at me for weeks, but now I had proof that something was very wrong. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I had to figure out the full extent of what was going on. I had to know if my suspicions were real or just paranoia. So, I began my investigation. I started by looking into the most obvious thing, Jenna's phone. She was always glued to it, sending messages and making calls. She never used to be that secretive with her phone, but lately, she'd been holding it close, like she didn't want me to see something. There were even times when I'd walk into the room, and she'd quickly lock the screen, or hide it face down when I got too close. I told myself it was nothing, just her usual, but now I wasn't so sure. The first time I really dug into it was when she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to the bathroom. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I knew I had to check. I glanced at the screen. It was unlocked. I opened the messages, heart pounding in my chest. The first thing I saw was a text from someone named Lisa, but there was something off about it. Lisa wasn't a name I had ever heard Jenna mention before. I was about to scroll down when I saw something that made my stomach drop. A text from Jenna. "I can't wait to see you tonight. I'll make sure we're alone this time." I couldn't breathe. What the hell was this? This wasn't just a casual text. It felt too intimate, too secretive. I didn't need to see more, but I couldn't stop myself. I scrolled further. Another message from Kyle. "I'm counting the minutes. I'll be ready for you. Just us like always." That was it. My worst fears were confirmed. Jenna and Kyle weren't just stepmom and stepson. They were lovers. I felt like the world was spinning around me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or punch something. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. I put the phone down slowly, my hands shaking. But I wasn't done. This was only part of the puzzle, and I needed more. I couldn't confront them yet. If I did, they'd lie. They'd deny it, spin some story to make it seem like I was crazy. I needed to build a stronger case, one they couldn't talk their way out of. I decided to follow Jenna the next time she went out. She'd told me she was meeting her friend Lisa for drinks again, but this time, I wasn't going to let her off the hook. I waited until she left the house, dressed up, of course, in a tight red dress that I didn't recognize. She never dressed like that for a casual night out, not unless there was something special going on. I grabbed my keys and followed her. I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I could see where she went. My heart was racing. Was she going to meet her friend again? Or was she going somewhere else entirely? She drove to a part of town I didn't recognize. It was a quiet area, not the kind of place you'd expect someone to go for drinks. I knew the city well enough, but this was unfamiliar. My pulse quickened as I watched her park in front of a small, rundown bar. I didn't recognize the place at all, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. Jenna got out of the car, but instead of heading toward the front door like I expected, she walked around to the back. I watched from across the street, trying to stay out of sight. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for, but I knew I couldn't let this moment slip away. And then I saw him. Kyle. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to have anything to do with this. But there he was, walking up to Jenna with that stupid, nervous look on his face. They exchanged a hug, and when I saw them embrace, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a family hug. This was the hug of two people who shared something dark, something that shouldn't have been happening. Their bodies were pressed too close, and the way their faces lingered like they didn't want to pull away, it made my blood run cold. I stayed where I was, my hands gripping the steering wheel, too stunned to move. Jenna and Kyle went inside the bar together, laughing softly, but I didn't need to follow them in. I knew exactly what was going on. I had the proof. When they came out about an hour later, I didn't follow them. I had seen enough. They were no longer hiding their affair. They were flaunting it in my face. I didn't need to see more to know the truth. I went home that night feeling like I was living in a nightmare. I barely slept, my mind racing with everything I had just witnessed. I wanted to confront them, to tear them both apart for what they'd done to me. But I knew I had to wait. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed them to know that I knew. For the next few days, I kept watching them. Jenna didn't seem to know I was onto her. She went on acting like everything was normal, pretending nothing had changed. But every time she and Kyle were alone, I felt this tight knot in my chest. I watched how they interacted, looking for anything that would give them away. Kyle started to get more confident, more smug in his deflections. He knew I was suspicious, but he didn't know how much I actually knew. The tension between us grew. It was like a game to him. Who could lie better, who could cover their tracks better. But I was determined to win. I couldn't take it anymore. The gut feeling, the suspicion, it was eating me alive. Jenna, my wife, had been distant for weeks. She was constantly on her phone, always too busy to talk, always working late or meeting friends. And then there was Kyle, my own son, acting weird around the house, avoiding me, staying in his room for hours, not even bothering to hide the glances he shot at Jenna when he thought I wasn't looking. Something was going on between them. I was sure of it, but I couldn't confront them without proof. I needed to be smart about it. I decided to play it safe. I told Jenna that I'd be staying late at work, a little white lie. I told her I had a meeting that would run long. She didn't question it, she never did. As usual, I told her to enjoy her evening, that I'd be home late, and kissed her goodbye like everything was normal. But instead of going to work, I parked the car just a few houses down from ours. I stayed out of sight, keeping a close watch on the front of the house. I needed to be sure. I couldn't let this feeling eat at me anymore. The minutes dragged on. I checked the clock. It had been 30 minutes, then an hour. Everything seemed quiet, just like any other evening. But then, something changed. I saw them. Jenna pulled into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. She was early, way earlier than I expected. Then Kyle came walking up the driveway behind her. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. He'd said he was staying with friends. But there he was, walking toward the house with Jenna, his head lowered, his posture strange, like he didn't want anyone to see him. It hit me like a ton of bricks. They were together. They were up to something, and I had to know. I watched as they went inside the house, talking to each other, laughing, too comfortable, too familiar. Something didn't sit right. I told myself I was just going to watch, just to make sure, but now that I saw them both inside, my instincts kicked in. I couldn't just sit here any longer. I got out of the car and quietly walked around the side of the house, keeping myself hidden. The back door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to slip in without making any noise. I held my breath as I stepped inside, moving silently down the hallway toward the bedroom. I could hear them now, their voices, muffled at first, but growing louder as I got closer. Then I heard the unmistakable sound, the soft moans, the rustling of sheets, the sounds of kissing. It was all too much. I felt my blood run cold, but I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't back out now. I had to see it, hear it, know the truth. I reached the bedroom door, and I paused for just a moment. I had no idea what I was going to do after this. I wasn't sure how I was going to react, but I had to know. I had to see it for myself. I pushed the door open slowly, barely making a sound. And then I saw them. Jenna, my wife, was lying on the bed, completely naked. Kyle, my son, was on top of her, kissing her like they had every right to be there. His hands were all over her body, running up her legs, his fingers tangled in her hair. Jenna's body was responding to him, her breathing heavy and deep, the way her hips moved against his. It was sickening, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. They didn't hear me at first. Neither of them had any clue I was standing there, witnessing the worst betrayal I could ever imagine. Then, Jenna opened her eyes. When she saw me standing there in the doorway, frozen in place, she gasped, her face turning white with panic. Her eyes widened, and her mouth opened, but no words came out. Kyle's reaction was almost identical. He jerked his head toward me, his face turning beet red. He immediately rolled off of Jenna, covering himself with the sheets, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Jenna scrambled to sit up, pulling the sheet around her body, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of what was happening. No, please, she stammered, but I wasn't listening. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest, every inch of me consumed with anger and disbelief. "This is what you've been doing behind my back," I said, my voice coming out low and dangerous. "This is the secret you've been hiding from me?" Jenna was already crying, her face twisted with guilt. "It's not what it looks like. Please, just let me explain. It was a mistake, just one mistake. Kyle didn't mean for this to happen. It just happened, and we didn't know what to do." Her words came out in a jumbled mess, all apologies and pleading, but I could hear the desperation in her voice. Kyle said nothing. He was frozen, staring at the floor, his glasses perched on his nose, looking like a scared little boy caught in the worst moment of his life. But there was no sympathy in me. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't look at her. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the room, the door slamming behind me. I needed space. I needed time to process what I had just seen, what I had just caught them doing. My world had just crumbled to dust in front of my eyes, and I didn't know how to move forward. I stood in the living room for a moment, my mind racing, trying to put the pieces together, trying to figure out what to do. Then finally I spoke again. "You both need to leave. Right now. Get your things and leave. I don't want to see either of you again," I said, my voice harsh and unyielding. Jenna started to protest, but I didn't listen. She was hysterical, crying harder now, but there was nothing she could say to fix this. Kyle didn't argue either. He just stood up slowly, his face pale, his hands trembling. He avoided looking at me, his gaze fixed firmly on the floor as he gathered his things. Without another word, they left. Jenna was still crying, her voice pleading, but I was done. There was no coming back from this. The betrayal was too much. It was over. I just stood there, staring at the door they'd walked out of, my whole body numb. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. This was the end. I stood there, my heart still pounding, the weight of everything crashing down on me. Jenna and Kyle were gone, but the house felt empty. Too quiet. Too still. I didn't know what to do with myself, what to feel. Anger, disgust, betrayal. They all boiled inside of me, but it wasn't enough. I felt hollow. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. I didn't even know what I was going to say, but I knew this was over. There was no going back. No chance of forgiveness. I couldn't look at Jenna the same way again, and I sure as hell couldn't trust Kyle anymore. My phone rang, and I almost dropped it when I saw Jenna's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear her sobbing apologies or her pitiful excuses. She had crossed a line I couldn't even begin to process. The house was so quiet now, the silence almost deafening. I had a few things to take care of, but I didn't feel like I was in control anymore. It was like everything had slipped away from me in that one moment when I saw them in that bed. A few hours passed, and I heard a car pull into the driveway. I froze. I didn't even have to check the window. I knew it was her. Jenna. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her voice. But I knew we needed to talk, if only for the sake of getting this all over with. I walked into the living room, and there she was, standing in the doorway, her eyes swollen from crying, her makeup smeared all over her face. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at me like I was the last person she could turn to. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. It was a mistake. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I couldn't believe the audacity of it. She had just betrayed me with my own son, and now she was standing there begging me to forgive her. I could hardly look at her. No, Jenna, I said, my voice cold and final. You don't get to apologize. Not now. Not after everything. She started crying again, but I couldn't bring myself to care. The anger was gone now, replaced by a deep, bitter emptiness. I had nothing left to give her. I don't want you here, I said, the words coming out sharper than I meant. I want you out of my house. Now. Jenna tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. I turned away and went into the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. I had made my decision. This marriage was over. I didn't care about her excuses or her tears. She wasn't my wife anymore, not after what she'd done. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Kyle. Of course. He was standing outside the bedroom door, his voice small and timid, like he was still a kid asking for approval. Dad, please, he started, but I cut him off. No. Don't you dare try to apologize too, I snapped. You betrayed me in the worst way possible. I'm done with both of you. There was a long silence. I could hear Kyle's shaky breath on the other side of the door. I knew he was crying, but I didn't care. Finally, the door opened, and Kyle stepped inside, looking at me like I was the one who had broken everything. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I didn't know what else to do. His voice cracked as he spoke, but I could barely understand him through the tears. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice low. You've ruined everything. Not just with me, but with your own mother. What kind of son does that to his father? He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, looking pitiful, like he wanted to say something that could fix everything but couldn't. He knew there was no coming back from this. I'm kicking you out too, I said. Both of you need to leave. Right now. I watched as Kyle walked out of the room, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. He wasn't even trying to defend himself anymore. He knew he had nothing left to say. A few minutes later, they were both gone. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I sat there in the living room, staring at the empty space around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. The weight of their betrayal was still heavy, but at least now I had control. The next day, I filed for divorce. I didn't care about the house, the money, any of it. I just wanted them gone. I couldn't live like this anymore. I couldn't trust either of them. And I sure as hell didn't want them back in my life. It was over. The divorce was finalized within a few months, and life slowly started to return to some kind of normal. I didn't hear from Jenna or Kyle after that. I didn't want to. But one thing stuck with me, a thought that still lingers even now. How could they both have betrayed me like that? I'll never understand it. But one thing I do know for sure is that I'm better off without them.